Button. There we go. And we are recording. So,
Okay.
welcome everyone. My name is Donny Lobree.
And I'm Kirk Prine.
And we're here again with a Queer Tribe conversation. We're delighted to be back again. And this time we're welcoming the Reverend
He knows his name as well as he knows his own, so it's a tongue tie.
Reverend Trent J. Thornley. So welcome, Trent. You're with us. Can you hear our voice?
I can. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you guys.
Excellent. Welcome, welcome. So I'll give a brief introduction, then we're going to dive in. So our Reverend Trent J. Thornley, JD, is the Executive Director and CPE Director at the San Francisco Night Ministry. He is an ACPE Associate Certified Educator, which certifies him to lead accredited spiritual care training programs. Trent is an ordained minister in the Metropolitan Community Churches and an ordained Buddhist Dharma leader in the Nyingma lineage of Anam Thubten. Trent holds a JD degree from Indiana University, an MA degree in Buddhist Studies from the Graduate Theological Union, and a certificate in Buddhist chaplaincy from the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California. Trent is also an Enneagram enthusiast. He is a certified professional and the secretary of the board of directors of the International Enneagram Association. He leads Enneagram workshops and seminars, and he maintains a website at www.livingenneagram.com. So welcome, Brent.
So,
thank you. Yeah, that was a mouthful.
We're all dripping with your training. Oh, wow! How juicy is all that?
I'm like, wait, is that? Did I do all that? Is that what I've been doing with my life? Oh
yeah.
Well, listen, I'm so appreciative of the informal introductions we had before coming on, because one of the participants on the call was talking about his interest in the Enneagram, which I actually wasn't thinking about bringing in, but I'm happy to do that. And so
Sure.
I feel like there's an invitation there to bring that piece in too. So
Sure.
Glad to be with you all.
Yeah. So just kind of following up with that juicy bio, though, the first question that we ask everybody is just simply to tell us about your spiritual journey. Those awakenings, what kind of got you on this calling, on these paths that you're on. So tell us stories that reflect your journey.
Well, in terms of my spiritual journey, I was raised in various Christian traditions. I actually got my first communion and baptism in the Catholic Church. My dad was Catholic. And my mom just took us there, I think, out of respect for him. But then I didn't, she didn't really totally resonate with the church. And so when we moved cross country, we just looked for a church that we found community in. And so a place that we could find, oh, thank you. I'm just now at my friend's house. I'm going to get on the computer here.
Right.
A place where we could find just more of a welcoming community. And so I was actually the most religious person in my family. My other family members were just more into the church for that sort of community feeling, but I think I was the one that felt more of a spiritual connection, and it was in the Presbyterian church at the time. And then eventually when we moved again, we joined a Methodist church. And so I kind of have a little bit of different flavors of the Christian tradition, but sort of fell away from it as I went into college and started to work through my process of coming out of the closet and just coming into who I was, sort of separate from the church. That said, I was still a religious studies major, so I was always still interested in studying religion, but I just didn't have a worship community, and eventually sort of fell away from the church. so that's kind of my initial background, but I wanted to bring that up because it actually does come into play because, and I'm just also looking here, I've got the meeting ID, so let me come on to the computer screen here.
Sure.
Apologize for this.
We'll be happy to welcome your
Okay.
as well as your voice. Yes.
All right. So let's see here. Oh, there you are. Okay. All right.
There we go. We're getting there.
Yeah. Hello.
Oh, there you are, Trent. How
There
about
you
that?
are. How lovely.
Oh, it's the miracle of modern
And
technology.
thank you to your friend for helping set this up. So
Yeah, they've been very patient with me. So
yeah, that's great.
Oh, where are you in the world, by the way?
where am I?
In the world.
Physically at the
Oh,
moment.
I am right now in Oakland.
Okay.
okay.
Okay, great.
Anyway,
Yeah. So I then, when I was first moving to San Francisco, I kind of got onto the psychedelic path. I lived in Haight-Ashbury and started experimenting with all kinds of mind expanding experiences. Some of it was just party experiences and just having a good time with people. But I always felt like I held those experiences as part of my spiritual path, even in the midst of sort of the party scene and the party aspect of it. I was really into the house music scene at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I discovered that that path really isn't very sustainable long term, I think for those of us who've been on it realize what a toll it takes on the body and on the mind too. I decided to try yoga and then found my way to a Buddhist meditation retreat in the insight meditation tradition, and went on that retreat. It was a 10-day retreat, and I awoke to the truth of the Buddha's teachings, and I'm just ever so grateful for that experience. And on the second retreat that I was on in the same tradition, I was having a very difficult period, and this is a sort of regular cycle. I'm sure we're all familiar with the journey at this point, that there's these moments of disintegration and confusion, and we encounter existential grief and our existential anger, and for me very prominently the existential fear and panic of really letting go. It was in those moments that the hymns of my Christian youth came back to me, and particularly the doxology from the Presbyterian Church. And I hadn't thought about those things in probably 20 years at that point, but there they were, and they sustained me, and they carried me across. And I'm feeling emotional just even talking about it. And so then I decided, well, I better take a look at if there's a way I could bring some of that in, some of the Christian tradition back in, because of its because my heart responded to it. And so even though I continued on the Buddhist path and really claimed Buddhism as probably my core tradition in many ways, I wanted to reintegrate that part of myself. And so what I did is I went to MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, where I did meet Kirk and Donny. So there found a place that celebrated queer community, people of all sexual orientations and genders across the spectrum, leading services, going up and taking communion together, going up in pairs, going up in small groups, to take communion, and it just being just revived my love of the communion table as an anchoring to the tradition, and everything the communion table represents, and certainly at MCC, where everyone can come to the communion table. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to profess any particular dogma or belief, anything like that. So that was very welcoming. And frankly, I stayed for the music. I just loved the Taizé services, and just found that was a bit of the heart that had to come through, that I know is in the Buddhist traditions, but I hadn't really connected my heart to the Buddhist tradition in the same way. That's just the reality. I know that that's there, but Guanyin never, for example, had the same resonance with me as did Jesus and Mary and the stories from my childhood. So in some ways, the tradition sort of just claimed me and didn't let go, and that's that. And then the interesting thing about the Enneagram, I wasn't even going to bring it in, but as I'm thinking about it,
so I was going to say, well, I'm kind of two-spirited or queer-spirited in that way, because I've got these two traditions that are very interwoven. And often people say, well, how can you be a Buddhist and a Christian, and how does that make sense? And I don't really worry about those questions. I typically just say, well, Buddha's, the Buddha was the spirituality of my head, and Jesus is the spirituality of my heart, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to figure it out on a theological or conceptual level or anything like that. But actually, in truth, I'm a Trinitarian, and the Enneagram has been, as it turns out, much like the functioning of the Spirit in the Trinity, has been the mediator. It is a very, very powerful and deep ancient wisdom tradition that allows you to translate one system into another. So it's kind of a Rosetta Stone. And so in many ways, it has bridged my Christian and Buddhist traditions and become a third tradition. So when I say enthusiast in the bio, it's actually much deeper than that, but that's not something I often share or talk about. So the last thing I would say about the spiritual tradition that I wanted to raise, because I saw it was in a later prompt too, is that I met my teacher in the Buddhist tradition, and that was probably the most significant moment of my life in many ways. I had, at that point, even forgone many things. I had sort of used the money I was making as a tenants lawyer to go on meditation retreats, and hadn't really been pursuing intimate relationships. Really had put everything on hold until I could find what I was searching for. And that's really been, there's been some loss and some grief there in terms of what, those aspects of my life. Still, I have a boyfriend, but I still haven't found a partner, a life partner, in the way that maybe I sometimes yearn for. But that's just been the reality of this journey for me. And that finding of that teacher, and her name was Eleanor, and she's a student of Chogyam Trungpa's, was very, very powerful for me and very meaningful for me. And in the way that one needs to fall in love with a teacher, I fell in love with Eleanor, and she was a big part of my story. So anyway, that's a little bit of a sketch of my journey. And
yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you can keep embellishing the stories as we go along, but kind of leads. I'd like to ask that question first. It's kind of like, well, what's the path or paths that kind of got you to wake up to be who you are, and to live out what that calling of the heart and the mind now that you talk about in both of those traditions. Which leads me to the next question. So the next question is about queer tribe, and so obviously, yeah, I can remember hanging out at MCC, and they had a phrase in when they opened up the service that they used to use in the past, but it was a home for queer spirituality. And I would always look to you, Trent, and say, this is a home for queer spirituality. You're part of the queerness that brings me here. So whether you realize it or not, I see you as like triple queer, in many different ways, and in all the things that you bring together and hold together in your body. But tell us about the queer tribe. Do you think we're a queer tribe? How are we a queer tribe? Kind of muse with us about the queer tribe.
Yeah, I was reflecting on that question. That's why I wanted to really bring in my connection with Eleanor, because I think maybe there are queer tribes. I don't know how to describe it. I do feel like there's a lot of change and transformation going on in the queer community, and so I don't personally get a sense that there's a cohesive tribe or a one monolithic tribe, but I do resonate with the idea of a queer lineage, and that's something from my Buddhist tradition, and that's really what I wanted to share the story with Eleanor, because there is a way in which, just as Eleanor was passing down the Dharma, the truth that she had experienced in the Buddhist tradition, I think there's a way in which we queer folk have been passing down our arts, our style of living, our ways to live, our ways to survive. I mean, some of those, the codes and the ways that we had to find others that shared our particular kinds of loves and find safe spaces to express our desires, and all kinds of things that have been passed down that we probably can't even completely trace or even realize maybe how long some of these things have been going on, and how the queerness at the edge of society has been kind of there through maybe even millennia, and that we've inherited that. So I feel like that lineage is still there. I don't know about a cohesive group or tribe. Yeah, so that's kind of my first thought with it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, we've interviewed, now over the past 4 years, a zillion different queer thought leaders, and none of us kind of have the same spin, but we all understand. I think it was Christopher Love a few sessions back. You may know him, the yoga teacher, who, at any rate, he was saying, yeah, well, it's kind of like gaydar. It takes one to know one kind of thing, that there's a recognition of each other that somehow is spiritual and is embodied all at the same time. Or as John Ballou used to talk about, well, we may have been born, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, etc. And there's a calling, though. So there's a calling for us to be on a path, to be awake as that person, as that gay man, as that lesbian, as that, so yeah, I think I love the idea of just kind of lineage, on the backs of all of these folks. We are being held. So yeah, beautiful.
No, I appreciated the word recognition. To me, that's a very powerful word in the spiritual path. Certainly in the Buddhist transmission from teacher to student, there's a recognition. It's another way you could call awakening, a kind of recognizing of that oneness, and that difference, and how those are held together. And the mind can't get itself around it. And then there's a theologian who I love dearly, Cynthia Bourgeault, a Christian contemplative, who calls Jesus a recognition event. And so the idea that we're recognizing each other, and I think we're recognizing and knowing each other and forming each other mutually in this queer lineage, that really resonates with me.
Beautiful, thanks. So we're living in like really cauldron kind of times, and so with racial injustice surfacing, with COVID, with all of the disparities that keep us apart rather than bringing us together, are happening. I'm wondering, as a gay man, as queer people, we've served many different purposes throughout time, in history, and especially during times of challenge. And I'm curious, in my third question is just, what's your vision, or what do you see for us, or even just hope for us, as a people, as a movement?
Well, I feel like there are some aspects of our movement that are assimilating quickly into sort of heteronormativity, and they're sort of like, well, I'm gay and I'm married to somebody of the same gender, and that's all the queerness you're going to get. Everything else is going to be, I'm going to be a capitalist. I'm going to be playing by the rules of the traditional family life and all the rest, that goes with that. And that's fine. I'm not criticizing or knocking that, but I do feel like, and that for me is often associated with whiteness. Let's be honest, white men. And so I feel like the journey for maybe that segment of the community is to remain queer, is to sort of go into those queer spaces. And I'm talking not even just sort of physically, but just to remain open in queer spirit to that which is strange and just beyond. And so it's not quite organized and assimilated entirely, and to remain open to that. And then also maybe to use that to connect with other forms of oppressions and to work towards liberation for everybody. So that, I think, is the challenge on that end. I think the challenge for folks who are more in the queer tribe of really going onto the edge of having all kinds of different forms of relationships, all the different configurations, and all the different gender identities and all the rest. I think that the challenge there in some quarters, not everybody is like this, obviously, I'm speaking very generally, but I think in some quarters we need to let go a little bit of the kind of purity tests, or the kind of way in which you have to be a certain way. You know, for example, can some of those quarters celebrate like the candidacy of a Pete Buttigieg, not because they agree with his politics, or maybe they disagree with all of his politics, but even just noticing that there's something important happening when the gay man can be that close to begin the most powerful political position in the world. Like, is there something there to celebrate? Can we let go of that a little to be able to celebrate and connect with that in some way? And then I think the other piece I would say is I feel like as we've matured, you know, as we've been growing up after we've had this period of coming out, you know, with gay liberation, I think we have to maybe recover this sense that, you know, everything goes isn't always good. You know, I mean, there's a way in which we needed that sort of radical permission to do everything always, whenever, and, you know, just to sort of reclaim and to feel pride in who we are and what we want, and to sort of validate our desires. And I think my hope is that we can also then say, you know, actually there's ways in which, you know, a word like sin, which may be outdated for those of us in the queer tribe, but that it's still pointing to something that's not about behavior. It's not about, you know, condemning people or judging people, but there's some way in which we can miss the mark, which I think is one of the original definitions of sin. There's a way in which we can be out of alignment. And so if there's a way that we can, as we mature, recover that, you know, say now that we've kind of passed all the need to reclaim our identities, now we can maybe, you know, acknowledge that there's ways in which, you know, hedonism doesn't translate into awakening. You know, just because everything goes doesn't mean you're free. And in fact, you may be more enslaved. And so I think that's the challenge, is to continue to reclaim some of that, maybe even queer it still, maybe come up with new language or vocabulary, but find a place for that.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Well, I know, you know, and in the studies during the AIDS epidemic, especially, which kind of catapulted some of the work that Donny and I do, and with Flesh and Spirit, which is all about, you know, long-term survivors of everything, of every kind of, you know, wound and trauma that happens in the world. But looking at people like George Solomon and Michael Callan in those early years of people who were living longer and better. One of the things they found among gay men who were surviving longer was they were politically active, they were spiritually active, and not focused on a spirituality or a religion, but they were spiritually active, and they also were people of service. So wherever possible, they would volunteer their service. And I think of you in those three things. Of you embody those things regularly, and I know you do some work with I believe it's called the Night Ministry. Is that correct? Yeah, and working with homeless people or people who are out on the streets at night, and I see you know, offering that service. So I'm wondering, speak to both your experience of giving service, but also giving service as a queer man, if you kind of wrap your head around that.
Yeah, I think this may be a bold statement, but I do feel that any authentic spirituality and authentic spiritual path naturally leads to some form of service. And that's not to mean that you have to be a volunteer for a nonprofit or something that, you know, along the lines that I'm doing. You could be a lawyer, an accountant, whatever. I mean, we need people of awakened heart in every field. You know, and I would even include maybe even like military spaces or the, you know, in the White House or whatever. You know, so I think there's a way you can be of service no matter what role you're taking. But I feel like it is a natural, you know, outgrowth. There's a way in which there is one way in which to be on a spiritual path is to get into touch with our fundamental aloneness. I mean, there are things that really only you will understand you, and that's kind of your job is to really understand and know you, and to be able to be open to being loved for just being you. And so there is a kind of, I don't use the word loneliness because that sounds sort of more you know, more like depressing, but there is a kind of a loneliness. I like aloneness better, a kind of aloneness that happens, and yet there's this impulse to want to share and want to connect and want to reach out and bring people into relationship and into healing. You know, there's just no other. Maybe even in part so that you don't feel so alone, but also because like that's just it's just the heart gets more sensitive. The heart just becomes more sensitive to wanting to do whatever we can, even against all odds, to create a little bit more of a just world and a little bit more of an easing of suffering for others, and that turns out to be our own path too. You know, it's sort of like. Yeah, so in a way to make that uniquely queer, I'd have to think about that. That's an interesting question.
Or maybe you're already living the answer.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, sometimes you just have to be like, well, I don't know what it is, but somehow it's in this body.
Right.
Somehow that's the answer. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Beautiful. So in just a few moments, we're going to open up to the folks who are here if they have any questions or comments, to pick your brain and your heart for wisdom. But is there anything else as you think about, you know, a vision for us in these times, that or wisdom for us? I mean, you have two really strong, powerful traditions that just embodied what you just said. Kind of, you know, I call it, Donny's got the T-shirt on, but the peaceful warrior. So that, you know, we talk a lot about the peaceful warrior is one who knows oneself and one who faces one's fears, but it's an alone path. You may do it in community, but you are alone. So, you know, Jesus knew that, Buddha knew that, you know, their spiritual question and journey was, you know, they had to say yes as individuals and go through the process. So, but I'm just wondering, is there anything else as you vision for us, if there's anything else that pops to your head before we open the lines up?
The one thing with the queer mode of service might just be that, you know, the aloneness that I think we're talking about is that nobody can grow up for you. Nobody can wake up for you. You know, there's a certain part that you have to do, and that's just the way it works. That's part of the transformation. And yet we really can't do it alone. I mean, we need community, we need teachers, we need lineage, we need the container. The Buddha once was asked of the triple gem, the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma, which people chant as they take refuge in those three. He was asked which of the three was most important, and he said the Sangha. You know, the Sangha, the community of awakening hearts is the most important part of the path. So I think there's a way in which we can accompany each other. You know, that's the point. You know, we can inspire each other. We can hold each other. We can we can bear witness to one another. And there may be a unique way in which we as queer people can do that for other queer people in the tribe. And there's a way in which we may have a special calling to do that for the people who have that queer spirit. So that would be my other offering.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to open up the line so you can unmute yourself if you have a question for Trent or a comment of how something he said is stirring inside of you. So anybody want to raise your hand? Yes, go for it. Bunny, you can see who it is.
Who? I'm sorry, I can't see who did. Oh yes, Adolfo, please. Sorry. What's your question?
Yeah. Hi, Trent. I really enjoyed hearing a bit about your journey so far. I'm curious because the conversation towards the end was, how can we help share this within the tribe? And I'm wondering, earlier you mentioned sin, and I come from a Roman Catholic tradition, and unfortunately a lot of what we talk about. But lately I've been thinking more of replacing sin with just mistake. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because as a former teacher, I remember in the classroom, it was all about mistakes and, celebrating mistakes. And I'm now currently playing with this idea, well, is sin really just a mistake? Mm-hmm. And my question then is, as we try to be, peace builders, peacekeepers, help people along the path in whatever way they're moving, sometimes I find the challenge comes up with language. Mm-hmm. And if our faith traditions have loaded words that other people, and so I'm wondering, what can we do, or do you have any ideas or any experiences where a common language can be found so that the conversation then becomes more fruitful, because we're not getting stuck on what does this word mean to you or me, but mm-hmm. It's like, we know, okay, we agree, this is the word, now let's go deeper.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for that, Adolfo. Yeah, I mean, the word sin, I think, is clearly probably worn out its welcome in queer circles. I'm just guessing. It's been such a wounding experience. And really, even the Christian tradition needs to have some kind of reckoning with numerous things, but certainly in the area of sexuality and gender roles. And I mean, if it's going to really be meaningful and carry forward, I think that's kind of happening in some quarters. But yeah, I like the idea of mistake. As you were talking, I was thinking about what would be a queer way of saying it. You could say, well, you're closeting part of yourself again. There's a way in which you're sort of, you're not fully showing up and showing out in alignment with who you are and with the divine. And so there's a way in which maybe sin is just closeting. But when I teach, I actually use the word over-functioning. I find that to be helpful. Like, well, you have a real gift with discernment, and it kind of overfunctions when you keep second guessing yourself and you fall into fear and you fall into separation. Mm-hmm. How can that gift not be, just, maybe like say, thank you very much. I know you're trying hard to get me to discern something wise here, but you're trying a little too hard and I'm missing the mark. Can we just kind of tamp that down a little bit? So maybe that's that's one I use in the teaching context. That seems to help. The last thought I would say is that since you're Roman Catholic, I don't know if you've heard Adolfo of Richard Rohr and his work. Of course, yes, he smiles, and yeah, there's someone he quotes, and I forget who that is, but he quotes this person often as saying, "It's all about original goodness." I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is that, and using the Christian tradition, he would say the world was created and it was good. That's our true inheritance. That's the true home, is the original goodness. And in my Buddhist tradition, it's called basic goodness. So we have an understanding of that in the Buddhist tradition too, basic goodness. Mm-hmm. And it's just returning to our basic goodness.
Thank you both for the question and the musings. Yes, thank you. Others, you have a question before we close? Yeah.
Yes, Brock.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Trent. I really enjoyed the conversation and hearing about you and your path and your growth as well. And Adolfo, what we say in New Thought is just missing the mark. And oftentimes when I've spoken, I've used the word mistake. So I think that's a good way to put it. I don't like that connotation of what sin is. And so I've tried to get away from that for a long time. But at any rate, what I wanted to know more about, Trent, was your night ministry. I'm a volunteer with Urban Angels San Francisco, and it was part of my schooling in my master's program for theology. I go to Emerson Theological Institute, was to volunteer my time. And it's become a huge part of my life. And it's really, truly been a remarkable change for me inwardly to be able to go out and serve and share and pray and talk and hug and hold these people and their doggies and their cats and their bunnies and all the things that are out there. So I was wondering what a little bit more about your night ministry was like. And then I guess the second part of that is, if you go back and ever have time and watch the conversation that we had in my interview, it was about my growing up in the South with my Southern Baptist grandfather and how I had to flee before they killed me. And part of it was, how can I now bring that to the story, to the teaching, to my path that I'm on now? And I've incorporated a way to share that story as a triumph, to share that as a success and not a pity thing or a horrible thing. But I'm grateful for that now that I've been through certain things. So I'm wanting to share and help others that have been in that type of mode as well. So I'm just more interested in what your night ministry is.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Brock. Yeah, on the second part, I don't know that I have a lot of words of wisdom to share, but what does come to mind, you're probably familiar with Henry Nouwen's Wounded Healer, and I feel like that may be that's what's coming to mind, is that there's a way in which our wounds can be a resource. Then, so long that we're not the wounded or the walking wounded, so long that there is sufficient healing there. I think that's part of the bearing witness to others, and having a special call to bear witness to others who've had similar kinds of journeys, even though we're all, of course, on our own with our own circumstances. But yeah, thank you for asking about the night ministry. So it's been around since 1964. It was founded by, we've been founded by a council of churches at the time, and it's just about going out on the streets and being a ministry of presence on the streets, even in coffee shops and bars and transit stations, just in the very late night hours. At the time, it was all the way to 6 a.m. Now we're out to 4 a.m. And just to be a non-judgmental, non-proselytizing, just a resource. And so now, and right from the beginning, the night ministry was an ally to queer folk of all kinds. Right from the beginning, even before the first night minister started, he was in touch with the Tavern Guild. Maybe if you know queer history in San Francisco, this was the guild of bar owners gay bar owners that would call each other when police raids were happening, and they became kind of a network, and I think grew into other forms of community. But anyway, and then just ministering to folks of all from the transgender folks on the streets who basically were forced into, or maybe chose to do, oftentimes do sex work because they couldn't get jobs and they couldn't have any other kind of way to plug into society, to runaways, to just people who were rejected of all, for their sexuality and their gender. So as we've got that in our DNA, so that feels very special to me to be a part of carrying that forward. And in addition to walking the streets at night, we operate a telephone line, and then we have street services. Now we're very multi-faith. We've got a Buddhist meditation group, an outdoor Christian worship service called Open Cathedral. We're starting, before the pandemic, we're starting an Open Shabbat, so an open air Jewish service. These are all ways that we're increasing access to spiritual care and community. So if we take, and I think this crowd's going to see this pretty quickly, if we take as axiomatic that spirituality is critical to human flourishing and critical to the relief of suffering and to coming into community, then really providing better access to spirituality to folks who, if the 50 people who showed up at an Open Cathedral went to any church in town, no matter how progressive and open-minded, I mean, these are folks who are often unhoused, who may be under the influence of some kind of substance and have their pets and have their belongings with them. I mean, they wouldn't be allowed in, frankly. I mean, so it's like, having a space to going all the way to meet people where they are and to help give them access to spirituality and to community, to enable that part of their flourishing. That's the mission of the night ministry.
Is there a website, Trent?
You can just go to www.sfnightministry.org.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I appreciate what you said.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you both. And we probably have maybe a minute for a last question before we wind up. Anybody else want to share what either got stirred, or a question or a comment before we close up our time with Trent?
I'm wondering how things are landing for you, Donny. It's good to see you.
Oh, for me. Oh, what? How interesting! You should ask me. Well, it's always so interesting about. I've had my own awakenings, and it's my awakenings have been very much through my body, that I felt them very much, and I've never really sought intellectual explanations for them, because I felt it through the body, and that was its own irrational, meaning without intellectualizing, truth. And what you've done today, and I've taken note here and there. So that's how you say it. Yeah. Like this idea about being this idea about being alone, or again, that's a bit of a misnomer, and I believe I understand what you meant.
Yeah.
You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. He's got to do the drinking himself. So yeah, when I think about my grand awakening, it was alone. I did it alone, but it was within community.
There you go.
All around community, and they had no idea, nor did they need to, but they had no idea what was going on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I once heard, actually, my teacher told me that that she had heard this from one of her teachers, that you might be able to appreciate. She said, "The truth cannot be described, but it can be proclaimed."
I love that.
Sweet.
Yeah. Thank you. Those are good almost closing words, at least. Yes.
Yeah, that's really stuck with me.
Yeah. Thank you. So if people want to reach you, to learn about the Enneagram, to learn about anything that you're doing, and learn about the night ministry, anything, how do they reach you, or are there things that you want to plug for, because this call will now go out to like about 1,000 gay men, or predominantly gay men. So
well, the best way to learn about the night ministry is go to the website, sfnightministry.org, and there's ways to support us financially, obviously, but there's also ways to volunteer for the telephone line. We can take volunteers from all over the world. We have a volunteer in Hawaii. We've got a couple in Ireland now, because everyone's working from home. That's one of the things the pandemic has shifted. So we can, so if you have an interest in working for a care line that specifically caters to people in the terms of their spiritual selves, but also is not judgmental or proselytizing, that might be a great way to volunteer and find community with us. So I would invite you into community through the night ministry. And if you want to reach me directly, you can email me at Trent, that's TRENT, at sfnightministry.org, Trent at sfnightministry.org. And I'm just so grateful to be here with everybody. And oh yeah, thank you for typing that.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I feel like, again, obviously one of the teachers that has kind of inspired my journey, and it's kind of bridged all of my traditions that I sample and welcome and channel through is Rumi, but the poem from Rumi about the guest house. It feels like you embody that poem of just really welcoming who and what arrives today in this moment. And I'm appreciative of your grace and your power that you bring to the table. So blessings on you in closing this call.
you. Well, and blessings on you both and the community you've created with Queer Spirit and what you've done to bring us together in community around these issues. And I am going to take you up and maybe try to see if I can find some of the earlier recordings of Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
so
they're juicy. Yeah.
what a treasure you're creating. A treasure of juiciness.
More juice.
Treasure of juiciness. Well, thank you for all of you actively listening in to this call, and know that there will be hundreds or maybe
Lots.
large number of folks who get to hear some of the juiciness. So thank you all, and
Yes.
and namaste.
Yes. Namaste. See you all soon again.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.